Yo, what's up? What's good? For me, I don't got no tripod, but I got a hand. And no mind, I just ran. Feel me? So I'm recovering. I'm a little winded, but that's besides the point. I was just thinking about how when I first, no, not even, probably like maybe still a couple years before I got saved, where God really starts, it's really seeds that start getting dropped in your mind. You have moments of like, you could say existentialism. Yeah, really. Like before Christ, like you was just like I was an existentialist when I was like I feel like 10 years old. You know, I look back at my notebooks when I was 10 years old. And like, man, what's so important, like when Jesus says, alright, so the apostles, I really think the apostles were pretty young. They were probably teenagers, early 20s. Because the way that they act in the scriptures, they come off of like very young people. And only one of them was married, and was Peter. But there's a time where they're passing by a group of kids. And the apostles basically, they're like, shoot, you know? They're like with Jesus, and they're telling the kids to go away. And Jesus is like, what are you guys doing? Like, heaven is for kids like this. Heaven, the kingdom of God is for kids like this. Like the faith. He said you can't enter heaven unless you have the faith like these kids right here. You need faith like a child. You need to have not the mindset of a child, but kind of in a way, you need to be like a child to understand things of God. And oftentimes, you know, when you start getting older, you know, you're like, I'm not a kid no more. You start thinking, oh, if I think things rationally, think things with logic, more like, you know, overanalyzing everything, that's the way to do it. But really, you gotta humble yourself and you think like a kid. It's easier said than done. But to understand the parables and all the metaphors that Jesus talks about, it doesn't make sense unless you have the mind of a child, the faith like a child. You know, when you're younger, it's very, kids are always asking questions. Kids are always curious about everything. Kids are always touching everything. Babies always putting things in their mouths. Like, they're always trying to, manipulate things. They're trying to see patterns, trying to see the patterns in everything. And many times as you grow older, especially in this world, where Satan is the ruler of this world, we lose that innocence. We lose that curiosity, that passion to learn. When God made us to be like that. And just because we're getting old, even if you're 60 years old, you have faith like a child, man, you're gonna be a rich man spiritually. That's all that matters, you know, when Jesus says, don't store your treasures in this world, because in this world, that's where, you know, it collects dust, it gets eaten by moths, and it's gonna get stolen. So store your treasure in heaven, but nobody's gonna steal, where it's gonna last forever. Wherever your treasure's at, that's where your heart is at. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Like, are you gonna invest in things in this world so you can pass it on to your kids? Not that there's nothing wrong with that, but ultimately the long-term goal is the soul, the spirit. But going back to what I was saying in the beginning of the video, I was just thinking how because when you come into Christ, oftentimes it can seem like the matrix is like glitching. You know, I've heard people describe it like that. I never really use terms like that, but it's like you start noticing patterns, coincidences. When the odds are like 1 in a million, you're like, how did that happen? But one thing I always heard before I would say that was, I always heard that God talks to people through people. And I had moments before, like growing up, where like it seemed like the person talking to me, I don't really have a relationship with me, but what they're saying is like striking through my soul, like it's specifically for me. And moments like that would be like, have me thinking, like it kind of just shocks your system. Because one of the hardest things I've noticed for people to really comprehend and understand, try and grasp, is the idea of God being so personal. Whether it's because if God really is that personal, then what's holding me back to being that close to God? Or maybe it's just like, I don't know, man, that seems too pretty fairy tale-ish to me. So I was reminiscing about a time where somebody starts talking about somebody I was starting to get to know, and suddenly they're like, yo, I feel like God talks to me, through people. He's talking to me through this Uber driver. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, I always heard about that people, like, God talks to people through people. I believe it, but not really. I don't even know. Like, not much faith. But if children is much easier to believe that stuff. Why do you think children believe in Santa Claus so easily? Like, faith. I mean, they're putting the faith in the wrong thing, Santa, when the faith should be in Jesus. People believe in Jesus. People believe in all types of things, reincarnation, that you be a tree in the afterlife, that that the universe came from nothing. Yet it's so hard to believe in Jesus Christ. Man, y'all stay paid up!